My name is Sarah Miller. I'm 32 years old, and I can still feel the sting of that applause. Not for me, of course. It was for Mark, my colleague, standing on that makeshift stage in the conference room, beaming, as our CEO, Mr. Henderson, announced his promotion to senior analyst. The same senior analyst role I'd been working towards, pouring my heart and soul into for the past 5 years. The same role they'd dangled in front of me like a carrot, only to snatch away with a smug grin. Mr. Henderson droned on and on about Mark's exceptional drive and innate strategic acumen, conveniently forgetting the countless late nights I'd pulled, the weekends I'd sacrificed, the actual strategies I'd meticulously developed that Mark somehow always managed to present as his own brilliant ideas. But the real gut punch, the one that made my blood simmer even as I forced a polite, almost painful smile, was the glowing mention of his newly minted company-funded MBA. A testament to our unwavering commitment to investing in promising talent, Henderson had boomed, his voice echoing in the too quiet room. At least it was too quiet for me. My own request for MBA funding, submitted a year prior with a comprehensive multi-page proposal detailing exactly how it would directly benefit the company's bottom line, had been met with a patronizing pat on the shoulder and a vague, dismissive, "Maybe next fiscal year, Sarah." Budgets are incredibly tight, you understand. Budgets, apparently, weren't tight enough for Mark, the son of Henderson's weekend golfing buddy. Budgets weren't tight enough to prevent them from pouring tens of thousands of dollars into him, while I was consistently expected to perform miracles with leftover scraps and sheer willpower. I remember standing there, my hands sore from clapping for him, feeling like the world's biggest fool, a complete idiot for ever believing hard work alone would be enough in that viper pit. The air in that room was thick with a self-satisfied smugness I could almost taste, a smugness that seemed to be directed right at me. They thought they had me figured out, the reliable workhorse, too timid to ever make waves, too desperate for their scraps of approval to ever truly challenge their blatant cronyism. They genuinely believed that was the end of my story, a quiet, pathetic fizzling out of my ambitions. Oh, how spectacularly wrong they were. You see, what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly fathom in their little bubble of privilege, was that their blatant favoritism, their casual, almost gleeful dismissal of my worth, it wasn't a full stop on my aspirations. It was the spark that ignited a wildfire. It lit a fire under me so intense, so focused, they couldn't have imagined it in their wildest dreams. And the look on their faces, especially Henderson's and Mark's, when my moment finally arrived, a moment they never, ever saw coming, a moment I meticulously planned in the shadows they cast me into. Well, let's just say it was far more satisfying, far more vindicating than any promotion or hollow praise they could have ever offered. Have you ever been so blatantly overlooked, or had your hard work stolen and credited to someone far less deserving, someone who just happened to be the boss's pet? Share your story in the comments below. It's time we all realized we're not alone in these infuriating battles. And hey, if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a single detail of how this all spectacularly unfolded. You won't want to miss their faces. It started subtly, as these things often do. Little comments here and there. My suggestions in meetings met with polite, yet ultimately dismissive nods from Mr. Henderson, only for Mark to rephrase the exact same point 5 minutes later and be lauded for his sharp insight. I'd present a detailed market analysis, painstakingly researched, and Henderson would skim it, his eyes already drifting towards the golf memorabilia on his credenza. Then Mark would waltz in with a half-baked PowerPoint, probably cobbled together an hour before, and Henderson would lean forward, captivated, asking engaging questions, offering mentorship. I remember one specific project, the Keston account. It was a potential game changer for the firm, a high-stakes, complex deal. I'd spent weeks, months even, developing a comprehensive strategy, understanding the client's nuanced needs, building a rapport with their mid-level contacts. I presented my findings, my roadmap, to Henderson. He listened, or pretended to, then said, "Good groundwork, Sarah. Very thorough. Now, Mark, why don't you take this and add some of your strategic flair? Let's see if we can really make this sing." Mark, who hadn't contributed a single original thought to the Keston file, just nodded sagely, as if he was being handed a rough diamond he was about to polish into brilliance. Of course, when the deal was eventually landed, largely based on the foundation I'd built, it was Mark who got the public commendation and the hefty bonus. I got a good job team email, CC'd at the bottom of a long list. My name, almost an afterthought. The boys' club atmosphere was suffocating. The important conversations, the real decisions, often happened on the golf course with Henderson and his preferred circle, or over expensive scotch at some exclusive bar I was never invited to. Mark would come in on a Monday morning, brimming with insights from these informal strategy sessions, while I was left trying to piece together the company's direction from vague meeting minutes and hallway whispers. Then came the MBA debacle. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the principle, the blatant, undeniable hypocrisy. When I submitted my proposal for company sponsorship, I'd included a cost-benefit analysis, testimonials from senior colleagues, the few who weren't Henderson's cronies, about my potential, and a detailed plan of how the advanced skills would directly translate into increased revenue and efficiency for specific upcoming projects. Henderson had called me into his office. He didn't even look at the proposal on his desk. He leaned back in his leather chair, a picture of paternalistic concern. "Sarah," he began, his voice smooth and condescending, "an MBA is a huge undertaking, a massive commitment. Are you sure you want that kind of pressure? We value your dedication here, on the ground. Sometimes too much ambition can be a distraction from the core tasks." He even had the audacity to hint that perhaps, for a woman, such intense career focus might, conflict with other potential life plans. I was speechless. Not just at the refusal, but at the sheer, unadulterated sexism of his reasoning. Less than 6 months later, Mark, who'd never once expressed any interest in further education, suddenly announced he was applying to the same MBA program. Henderson was ecstatic. "Excellent initiative, Mark. Exactly the kind of forward thinking we need," he'd boomed in a team meeting. There was no talk of distraction or too much ambition for Mark. His application was fast-tracked, the company's financial backing approved almost overnight. When I quietly, privately, pointed out the disparity to Henderson, referencing my own earlier rejected request, he just waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, that was different, Sarah. Mark's situation is unique. He's on a particular trajectory." The implication was clear. Mark's trajectory was upward, gilded, and paved by the company. Mine was tolerated, as long as I stayed in my lane and didn't ask for too much. The daily grind was exhausting. My ideas were either ignored or, worse, borrowed by Mark, who had an uncanny ability to present them as his own epiphanies, usually after one of his strategy sessions with Henderson. I'd see paragraphs from my reports appearing in his presentations, my analytical frameworks suddenly becoming his innovative models. When I tried to speak up, even gently, I was branded as not a team player or too sensitive. Henderson once told me during a performance review where I received a meets expectations despite exceeding all my targets, "Sarah, you need to learn to manage your perceptions. Mark has a way of inspiring confidence." The translation was clear. Mark, the man, was inherently more believable, more leader-like than I, the woman, could ever be, regardless of actual competence or contribution. I felt like I was screaming into a void, my voice swallowed by their casual, systemic disregard. It was a constant, gnawing injustice that ate away at my confidence, or at least, it tried to. Just when I felt like I was drowning in that sea of corporate indifference, a lifeline appeared, and from the most unexpected quarter. It wasn't someone from my department, or even a senior manager who secretly championed my cause. It was Mrs. Eleanor Vance, the notoriously exacting, incredibly sharp, and universally respected head of acquisitions from our biggest client, Sterling Corp. We'd interacted a few times, peripherally, on conference calls where I was usually just a silent participant, taking notes while Henderson and Mark did all the talking. But then came the Blackwood Industries merger, a massive, incredibly complex deal that our firm was desperate to facilitate for Sterling Corp. Henderson naturally put Mark in charge as the primary liaison, despite Mark having very little actual M&A experience. I was assigned, as usual, to do the heavy lifting in the background, the due diligence, the financial modeling, the risk assessment. Essentially, I was building the entire engine while Mark was being positioned to sit in the driver's seat and take the victory lap. During one particularly grueling late-night session, buried under spreadsheets and legal documents, I discovered a critical flaw in the valuation model Mark had presented to Sterling Corp. A flaw that, if uncorrected, could cost them millions. It was a subtle error, easily missed if you weren't deep in the weeds, but potentially catastrophic. My first instinct was to go to Henderson, but I knew how that would play out. He'd either dismiss my concerns or worse, tell Mark, who would then find a way to fix it and claim he'd caught it himself. So I took a risk. I drafted a polite, concise email directly to Mrs. Vance, outlining the discrepancy with supporting data, framing it as a point of clarification for her team's internal review. I bypassed Henderson and Mark completely. I hit send with my heart pounding, half expecting a furious call from Henderson the next morning. Instead, about an hour later, my direct line rang. It was Mrs. Vance. Her voice was crisp, no nonsense. "Ms. Miller," she said. "Eleanor Vance here. I've just reviewed your email regarding the Blackwood valuation. Your analysis is astute, very astute. There was no condescension, no questioning of my authority or expertise, just a straightforward acknowledgement of my competence." She asked a few pointed questions, which I answered clearly and confidently, having lived and breathed those numbers for weeks. "You've saved my team, and potentially your firm, a significant headache, Ms. Miller," she concluded. "I appreciate professionals who do their homework thoroughly. It's a rare commodity these days." The next day, during the main video conference with Sterling Corp., Henderson was pontificating about the deal's progress, with Mark nodding along beside him like a bobblehead. Suddenly, Mrs. Vance interjected. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice cutting through his bluster, "I'd specifically like to commend Sarah Miller for her exceptional diligence on the Blackwood valuation. Her proactive identification of a critical data point was invaluable. It's clear she possesses a profound understanding of the financial intricacies of this deal." "You could have heard a pin drop." Henderson looked stunned, blinking rapidly. Mark's confident smirk faltered, replaced by a look of bewildered confusion. It was the first time anyone, especially someone of Mrs. Vance's stature, had publicly acknowledged my contribution, let alone praised it so directly in front of Henderson. From that day on, Mrs. Vance made it a point to include me in direct communications. If she had a technical question, she'd email me directly, often CCing Henderson and Mark, but addressing her query specifically to me. She'd ask for my opinion in meetings, deliberately drawing me into the conversation. It wasn't overt. She wasn't fighting my battles for me, but she was subtly creating space for me, acknowledging my expertise in a way that Henderson and Mark couldn't ignore, at least not in front of their most important client. She never mentioned the internal politics of my firm, never alluded to the favoritism. She simply treated me as a competent professional, and in doing so, she gave me a shield and a small but crucial platform. Her quiet, consistent validation was like a breath of fresh air, a reminder that my skills did have value, even if my own bosses were blind to it. It was the first crack in their carefully constructed wall of dismissal. The day Henderson dismissed my MBA request with that patronizing lecture about too much ambition was the day something inside me shifted. It wasn't just anger, it was a cold, hard resolve. If they wouldn't invest in me, I would invest in myself. If they wouldn't recognize my worth, I would build it so undeniably, so powerfully, that they'd have no choice but to see it, whether they liked it or not. So, while Mark was coasting, enjoying his company-funded MBA classes and schmoozing with Henderson on the golf course, my real work began. Every evening, after putting in a full day at the office, often staying late to fix Mark's errors or finish the tasks he'd conveniently forgotten, I went home to a different kind of work. I enrolled myself in that same prestigious MBA program, the one they'd denied me. I paid for it myself, draining my savings, taking out loans. My small apartment became a fortress of textbooks, case studies, and financial models. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford. My social life dwindled to almost nothing. There were nights I'd stare at complex quantitative analysis problems, fueled by lukewarm coffee and sheer stubbornness, tears of frustration welling up, wondering if I was completely insane. But then I'd picture Henderson's smug face, Mark's undeserved praise, and that fire in my belly would roar back to life. I didn't just aim to pass, I aimed to excel. I devoured every subject, not just the ones directly related to finance, but also leadership, negotiation, corporate strategy, organizational behavior, all the skills Henderson so clearly thought I lacked or didn't deserve to cultivate. I wasn't just learning theory, I was actively applying it, dissecting the very dynamics of the toxic workplace I was enduring, understanding the psychology of power and influence. I participated in every group project, networked with professors and classmates from diverse industries, absorbing knowledge and perspectives that were light years beyond the insular, nepotistic world of my current firm. During the day at the office, I played the part of the diligent, overlooked employee. I kept my head down, did my work flawlessly, and continued to be the reliable backbone they took for granted. They saw me as predictable, as static. They had no idea that every evening I was transforming. I was forging new armor, sharpening new weapons. My weekends were spent not recovering from the work week, but buried in the library or attending intensive weekend seminars. Mrs. Vance's subtle recognition had given me a sliver of visibility with Sterling Corp, and I leveraged it carefully. When she asked for my input, I gave concise, well-researched, data-driven answers. I made sure my work for Sterling was not just good, but exceptional. I started anticipating their needs, providing proactive solutions before they even voiced the problems. My direct interactions with her team increased, always professional, always focused on delivering value. I learned to navigate the corporate landscape with a new kind of quiet confidence, born from the knowledge I was accumulating and the skills I was honing in secret. I also started discreetly building a network outside the company. I attended industry conferences, on my own dime, of course, connected with professionals on LinkedIn, and sought out mentors in different fields. I knew that my future couldn't solely depend on the whims of Henderson and his cronies. I was building escape routes, contingency plans, and, more importantly, a reputation based on merit, not connections. The irony was, the more they underestimated me, the more time and space they inadvertently gave me to build my arsenal. They were so focused on grooming Mark, their chosen one, that they became blind to the real growth, the real ambition that was flourishing right under their noses. They saw Sarah, the quiet analyst. They had no clue they were dealing with Sarah Miller, MBA candidate, future force to be reckoned with. They were so busy patting themselves on the back for Mark's potential that they never once looked closely enough to see the quiet revolution I was staging in my own life, fueled by their own injustice. And the best part? They had absolutely no idea what was coming. If this story of silent resilience and building yourself up resonates with you, hit that like button to support more content like this. It truly helps the channel grow and reach others who might need to hear they're not alone. The day of Mark's promotion ceremony arrived. It was also, coincidentally, the day after I'd received my final MBA grades, distinction in every module. The irony wasn't lost on me. The conference room was decorated with cheap balloons and a banner proclaiming, "Congratulations, Mark!" Henderson was in his element, beaming like a proud father, his arm draped chummily around Mark's shoulders. Mark, for his part, looked like the cat that got the cream, and then some. He was lapping up the attention, his chest puffed out, already embodying the senior analyst role he hadn't earned. I stood at the back, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, forcing that polite, painful smile I'd perfected over the years. Henderson began his speech, a sycophantic ode to Mark's supposed brilliance. He talked about Mark's vision, his leadership potential, and of course, his new, company-funded MBA. "This is what happens when we invest in our best and brightest," Henderson declared, gesturing expansively at Mark. "Mark's MBA has clearly equipped him with the strategic tools to take this department to new heights." A wave of nausea washed over me. The injustice of it all, the sheer audacity, was almost too much to bear. I watched as colleagues clapped, some genuinely, others, I suspected, out of obligation. My moment was coming. I had timed this perfectly. Just as Henderson was winding down, preparing to hand over to Mark for his acceptance speech, a new figure entered the conference room. It was Mrs. Vance from Sterling Corp. This was not part of Henderson's plan. An unreadable expression was on her face. She was accompanied by two of her senior team members. A hush fell over the room. Henderson looked momentarily flustered. "Eleanor, what a pleasant surprise. We weren't expecting you." Mrs. Vance smiled, a cool, professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mr. Henderson, Mark, my apologies for the interruption. We were just finalizing some details on the new strategic partnership, and I felt it was important to share some news that directly impacts our collaboration moving forward." Henderson puffed up, clearly assuming this was more good news related to Mark. "Of course, Eleanor. Always a pleasure. Mark here is about to be officially promoted to senior analyst, a key role in managing our Sterling Corp relationship." Mrs. Vance's gaze swept over Mark, then landed on me, a flicker of something. Respect? Acknowledgement? In her eyes. "Indeed," she said. "And Sterling Corp. Values strong, proven leadership and strategic expertise in our key partners. Which is why," she paused, letting the silence hang heavy, "we have made a formal request to your board, Mr. Henderson, which I understand was approved this morning." Henderson looked confused. "A formal request?" "Yes," Mrs. Vance continued, her voice clear and carrying to every corner of the room. "Sterling Corp has been exceptionally impressed with the strategic insights, the meticulous financial acumen, and the proactive problem-solving demonstrated consistently by one of your team members, specifically on the Blackwood merger and several subsequent sensitive projects. As such, we have requested, as a condition of our expanded multi-million-dollar, 5-year strategic partnership, that Ms. Sarah Miller be appointed as the lead strategic liaison and senior project director for all Sterling Corp accounts." The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a feather drop. Henderson's jaw literally sagged. His ruddy complexion turned a sickly shade of pale. Mark, who had been preening just moments before, looked as though he'd been slapped. His confident smile evaporated, replaced by an expression of utter disbelief and dawning horror. His eyes darted from Mrs. Vance to Henderson, then to me, wide and uncomprehending. Mrs. Vance wasn't finished. "Furthermore," she added, her gaze unwavering, "we understand Ms. Miller recently completed her MBA with distinction from the very same institution as Mark, funding it entirely through her own initiative, a testament, I believe, to her extraordinary commitment and capability. Sterling Corp believes in rewarding such dedication and proven talent. Her new role will, of course, come with the commensurate authority and compensation package reflective of its significance to both our organizations." I watched Henderson's face. The shock, the dawning realization of his colossal misjudgment, the public humiliation. It was all there, playing out in slow motion. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, speechless. Mark looked like he was about to be physically sick. His moment of triumph had just been utterly, spectacularly, and very publicly upstaged. The cheap balloons suddenly seemed to mock him. I allowed myself a small, genuine smile. I stepped forward slightly. "Thank you, Mrs. Vance," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I'm honored by Sterling Corp's confidence and look forward to leading this partnership." I glanced at Henderson and Mark, their faces a delightful study in abject shock and mortification. The applause that followed was tentative at first, then grew, genuine and appreciative this time. It wasn't for Mark, it was for me, and it was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The air, once thick with their smugness, was now crackling with my quiet, undeniable victory. The aftermath of Mrs. Vance's announcement was illuminating. The stunned silence in the conference room eventually gave way to a buzz of hushed conversations as people processed what had just happened. Mrs. Vance and her team departed shortly after, leaving Henderson and Mark to grapple with the new reality. Mark's promotion party had effectively turned into my unofficial coronation, and the cheap balloons now seemed to droop in sympathy with his deflated ego. Later that day, Henderson summoned me to his office. The usual arrogance was gone, replaced by an uncharacteristic nervousness. He fidgeted with a pen, avoiding eye contact. "Sarah," he began, his voice strained, "well, this is quite a development. Sterling Corp certainly holds you in high regard." He attempted a weak smile. "Congratulations on the new role, and the MBA, of course." You kept that quiet. I just looked at him, my expression neutral. Thank you, Mr. Henderson. I focused on my studies and my work. He cleared his throat. Right, well, obviously, this changes things. Your responsibilities, your standing within the firm. We'll need to discuss the specifics of your new compensation package, team allocation. He was rambling, clearly uncomfortable. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted, and he knew it. Sterling Corp was our largest client. Their demands were not suggestions. Then came the part I was expecting. Look, Sarah, he said, finally meeting my gaze, a hint of desperation in his eyes. About the MBA funding. And, well, perhaps some past projects. Maybe there were some oversights, misunderstandings. I want you to know the company values all its dedicated employees. I let the silence stretch for a moment, enjoying his discomfort. Misunderstandings, Mr. Henderson? I finally said, my voice calm but firm. Or a consistent pattern of undervaluing and dismissing my contributions while actively promoting and funding a less qualified male colleague. Let's be clear about what happened here. His face flushed. He started to bluster, then seemed to think better of it. Now, Sarah, there's no need for— There is every need, Mr. Henderson, I interrupted, my tone hardening. I will be leading the Sterling Corp account as per their request. I expect the full authority, resources, and respect that come with that position. There will be no more borrowing of my ideas, no more being relegated to the background. My team will be chosen based on merit, not favoritism. And any attempts to undermine my leadership will be addressed directly and, if necessary, escalated to the board and to Mrs. Vance. He looked like I'd slapped him again. The old Sarah, the one who would have meekly accepted his platitudes, was gone. He nodded slowly, the fight draining out of him. Understood, Sarah. Completely understood. Mark tried to approach me a few days later, looking pale and diminished. Sarah, hey, he mumbled, about the other day. Crazy, huh? Listen, no hard feelings, right? Maybe I could, still assist on the Sterling account? I do have that MBA now, too. I gave him a cool, appraising look. The audacity was almost comical. Mark, I said, my team for the Sterling account will consist of individuals who have consistently demonstrated competence, integrity, and a collaborative spirit. You'll be receiving your new assignments from Mr. Henderson shortly. I trust they will be appropriate for your current skill set. His face fell. The unspoken message was clear. His free ride was over. He wouldn't be coasting on my work or Henderson's patronage any longer. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. I assembled my team, handpicking talented individuals who, like me, had often been overlooked. The atmosphere in our department began to change. There was a new sense of purpose, of fairness. My interactions with Henderson were strictly professional, focused on deliverables. He was noticeably more deferential, the old boys' club bravado significantly toned down. He knew I had the backing of our most important client, and that I wasn't afraid to use it. The quiet satisfaction of seeing him squirm, just a little, every time he had to approve one of my strategic recommendations was a small but deeply gratifying bonus. I wasn't just doing a job, I was reshaping the culture, one successful project, one fair decision at a time. Looking back, that whole journey feels like a lifetime ago, yet the lessons are still so vivid. It wasn't just about getting an MBA or a promotion. It was about reclaiming my narrative, defining my own worth when others tried to dictate it for me. For years, I allowed their perceptions to chip away at my confidence, to make me question my own abilities. I worked harder, hoping they'd notice, hoping fairness would prevail. But what I learned is that in environments built on favoritism and bias, hard work alone is often not enough. You have to become your own advocate, your own investor, your own champion. The humiliation I felt watching Mark get everything handed to him, the sting of Henderson's condescending dismissal, those weren't endings. They were fuel. They forced me to dig deeper, to find a strength I didn't know I possessed. My silent rise, as I called it, wasn't silent out of choice, but out of necessity. In that environment, openly challenging the system would have likely gotten me fired or further marginalized. So, I worked in the shadows, building my skills, my knowledge, my network, until I was too competent to ignore, too valuable to dismiss. True empowerment, I've realized, doesn't come from external validation, though Mrs. Vance's intervention was certainly a catalyst and a welcome affirmation. It comes from within. It's about recognizing your own potential and relentlessly pursuing it, even when the world around you is telling you you're not good enough or that it's not your turn. It's about understanding that your value isn't determined by someone else's opinion, especially when that opinion is clouded by prejudice or self-interest. The satisfaction of that climax, of seeing their faces pale with shock and dawning realization, wasn't just about revenge, though I won't lie. There was a sweet, vindicating pleasure in it. More importantly, it was about justice. It was about the system, however briefly, being forced to acknowledge merit over connections, competence over cronyism. It was about demonstrating that talent, true talent, will eventually find its way to the light, especially if you're willing to put in the Herculean effort to nurture it yourself. My story isn't unique. I know so many of you watching have faced similar battles, similar injustices in your own workplaces. You've been underestimated, your ideas stolen, your ambitions dismissed. What would you have done in my situation? How did you handle being overlooked or undervalued? Share your experiences and your triumphs in the comments below. Let's create a community where we can lift each other up, share strategies, and remind each other that we are not alone in these fights. Your story matters. Your resilience matters. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more stories of turnaround and empowerment. Because every single one of us deserves to have our moment, to see the faces of those who doubted us change from smugness to shock, and finally to a grudging respect. Never let anyone else define your limits.